There we go.
Cleaned up. Okay. So Palestine, how we got here. Here's some photos that one of our members from DSA, Athena, contributed. She wanted to give the human dimension to this conflict, and which I feel like is a very valuable contribution. So a little background first. We'll go into the ideology of Zionism. Um, with the long history of persecution in Europe, it was an idea first formulated by an Austrian journalist, Theodor Herzl, in 1897. There's a photo there below of one of the early congresses that he hosted, bringing together many of Jewish leaders within Europe to kind of how they move forward. Um, Beginning in the late 19th century, you see the first migrations to Palestine. Uh, the term that they use in Hebrew is aliyah. It means ascent. Um, and the first one in that first period, they break up between 1882 and 1903 was made about 35,000 Jews. Although, of course, in the earliest years, conditions were not very great on the ground, so not all those that went stayed. There's a quote from Theodor Herzl's diary on strategies for Zionism. I'll read it out. We must expropriate gently the private property on the estates assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in the transit countries while denying it employment in our own country. The property owners will come over to our side. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly. Those that he refers to as the penniless population are the native Palestinians. So the idea was to basically remove them from the lands by basically not offering them any economic opportunities. There's a couple graphics on the Jewish migration to Palestine over the 20th century. The one on the right shows from which populations, from which areas they came from. And you might see there's that one big bar in 1992 2001. Many Jews fled after the fall of the USSR. But let's get into the history of it. So things started looking up for Zionism during World War I when they started getting official British recognition. Um, in the fight against the Ottoman Empire during World War I, the British enlisted the help of the Arab population through T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. He was a real person, to revolt for their own sovereignty. So what happens was that there was revolt by the Arabs against the Ottoman Empire to basically claim their own lands. But the British were actually secretly plotting behind them with the French to divide up Ottoman Syria. Ottoman Syria was the name of the territory that is today the modern day Levant areas like Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and Jordan. Um, and then there was more salt in the wound added when the British Foreign Office published the Balfour Declaration, which was official British support for a Jewish homeland within Palestine. During this period, we also see the second Aliyah, so 35,000 more Jews migrate to Palestine. But again, most left because of rudimentary conditions on the ground. And there's a view of the official Balfour Declaration in 1917, written to Lord Rothschild, basically just giving official support by the government for the Jewish people to establish their own state or at least a homeland within Palestine, which the Arabs, of course, thought was a massive betrayal, considering that that was what they were promised on behalf of revolting against the Ottomans. There is an image of the sphere of influences during World War I. This green area is what the part that was divvied up for the French. So we have like parts of Lebanon, Syria, modern day Iraq. Um, this whole purple part is under international control, and the yellow is under part of the UK. And then after World War I, with the establishment of the League of Nations, they basically took territories from the defeated countries and created mandates and gave them over to the winning parties to administer until those territories were thought to be stable and prosperous enough to stand on their own 2 feet. So this was beginning in the year 1920 until 1948. And I'll go more into the history of Palestine, of the Mandate for Palestine. So beginning in 1920 is when Great Britain begins to administering the state of Palestine, the territory of Palestine. Um, it's considered officially a caretaker state. Um, However, during the course of this period, there's more and more migration to Palestine. By 1936, 16 years after the British take over, Jews numbered nearly 400,000 in the territory, about a third of the total population, which in 20 years, the population basically doubles. This was also accompanied by the founding of various institutions needed for civil administration. Um, the Arabs, seeing these changing demographics, become increasingly riled up. Um, and there's skirmishes and fights that break out between the Arab Jewish populations. The local administration is pretty sympathetic to the Arabs, but anytime that they try to offer them a concession, it's dismissed by London until in 1936 all hell breaks out, which is only subdued until the British pass a white paper, which puts an official limit on Jewish migration, which the Arabs are not happy about, but it did settle things down. However, while that immigration was limited, it still did happen illegally. During World War II, things quieted down until the UN trying to put an end to the conflict, the UN being founded after World War II, trying to put an end to the conflict, passed a resolution to create a two-state solution between Arab and Jews. However, this just resulted in the first Arab-Israeli war, just full-out fighting between them, which resulted in uh, the official declaration of Israel, the state of Israel. This day, May 15th, 1948, is now remembered as the Nakba catastrophe by Palestinians. And many of the Palestinians, hundreds of thousands of them, were displaced by the official creation of Israel. And there's a couple of photos of the riots that broke out in 1936, and the British trying to bring peace back into the area, and a few photos of the Nakba, the displacement, at the many of the Palestinians being put into camps. This is an image to compare. So 1947, on the left is the resolution, the Partition Plan put out by the UN. The Arabs not that happy with this idea that Palestine would be split up, try to prevent it, but the Israelis get the upper hand and wind up with much more of what the UN even had set aside for them. So uh, what you see with the West Bank in black on the right, which would be occupied by Jordan, and this the tiny strip on the left, which would be occupied by Egypt. Then we jump forward a few years to the mid-century. 1956, we have Nasser. He's a Pan-Arabist. He is in Egypt. In 1952, he led a revolution to change things, and part of his ideology was a creation of an Arab state across all of the countries that are occupied by Arabs, this including Palestine. Um, so he was from the beginning very critical and wanted to get rid of Israel. Um, so part of this was, and he also wanted to increase sovereignty for Egypt. Um, so one of his measures was that in 1956 he nationalized the Suez Canal, which is a key artery in global commerce connecting the Mediterranean to the Arab Sea. Israel, UK, and France try to invade Egypt, but cannot reverse the decision. In 1967, Egypt moves ahead with blockading the Straits of Tiran, which is a passage vital for Israeli oil imports, and which they consider a casus belli or provocation of war. Egypt also mobilizes its troops to the border of Israel, but Israel preemptively strikes the Egyptian and Syrian air forces and pretty much destroys over 90% of it before they can get anything off the ground. Israel then invades, occupies Gaza, Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, which were Jordan territories of Jordan, and then the Golan Heights of Syria, because they did not commit to a ceasefire agreed to by Egypt and Jordan. This conflict also marks a watershed moment between U.S. and Israel relations. This is basically the point where the special relation between U.S. and Israel begins. You all have to understand the context of this was also very central to the Cold War. U.S. was trying to play both to both sides, to both Israeli and Arab sides, up to this point until Nasser decided to firmly join the Soviet camp because the U.S. took away funding for one of his projects in Egypt, and seeing how decisively Israel was able to defeat the Arabs, they felt that they could put all their eggs in with Israel instead of having to also give funding and weapons to the Arabs. War broke out again in 1973 over Israeli occupied territories without any real major changes in the landscape. A couple more images over the area. So you see how the West Bank is now occupied by Israel, and also the Gaza Strip is also occupied by Israel, and they went on to occupy all the Sinai Peninsula until 1982 because of the Camp David Accords brokered by the U.S., which was also offensive to the Palestinians because they were wondering why didn't you broker talks between us and Israel. I'll move on to attempts for Palestinian self-sovereignty and self-administration. So the PLO is essential to all of this. The PLO was founded by a group of exiled Palestinian communities in 1964 by the Arab League being a project of Nasser to try to unify Arabs across the different Arab states. And it was an attempt to try to control Palestinian nationalism within an Arabic scope. However, it becomes its own thing after 1967, the Six-Day War, because of the sound defeat of the Arabs, and they felt like the Arabs could no longer that the Pan-Arab movement could not really support their goals. And also the U.S. was very wary of the Pan-Arabic movement because of its flirtations with socialism, and it had a very strong anti-imperialist line, very anti-imperialist rhetoric. So the most prominent faction within the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, is what the acronym stands for, is Fatah, led by Yasser Arafat, which in the beginning seeks the destruction of Israeli sovereignty to be replaced by a secular state, multi-ethnic secular state. Their main strategy is to basically conduct raids from surrounding Arab states into Israel, kind of in a protracted war until their expulsion. They originally are headquartered in Jordan until they were expelled. And thereon, they went to Lebanon until Israel decided to invade Lebanon to get the PLO out. And then they had to move to Tunisia. However, in 1988, there is a complete shift in their approach, in the PLO's approach. And that's when PLO recognizes the existence of Israel to exist. And when the U.S. kind of steps in to begin talks to broker discussions between Israel and the PLO. I'll talk a little more on that later, but first I'll go more into the to the breadth of U.S. involvement in the area. The U.S. was the first to recognize Israel in 1948, and ever since, in the entire history of Israel, they are the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II. And as I mentioned earlier, the area of the Middle East was kind of like a proxy area for the Cold War. Nasser went to the Soviet camp after the U.S. Retracted funding for one of his dams. And Kennedy sold advanced anti-aircraft Hawk missiles to Israel in 1962. They went ahead and brokered peace talks between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Lebanon, and prevented engagement in the Gulf War. The first Intifada is a revolt by the Arab population within Palestine. So most of the PLO was from outside of Israel, but the Intifada was by the Palestinian population, the Arab population still within Palestine. And as the Cold War winds down, the U.S. begins to broker negotiations towards a two-state solution, beginning with the Madrid Conference in 1991, and then the Oslo Accords, which sees the end of violent protests in Israel, occupied Gaza, and the West Bank. One of the main components of the Oslo Accords was the creation of the Palestinian Authority, which is a governing administration composed of a council of members of the different factions of the PLO, which are transferred power in, there's 3 different zones. I'll go into it later with a map of the current layout of Israel. So moving forward to the 21st century, the Oslo Accords were supposed to be a framework, but the two-state solution was supposed to be decided and be negotiated later on using that framework. However, in 2000, after the Camp David summit, the negotiations break down with neither side able to come to an agreement. This sparks the beginning of the Second Intifada. And with the death of Arafat in 2004 and his replacement with Mahmoud Abbas, other factions besides Fatah come to the fore, such as Hamas, which is an acronym in Arabic for Islamic Resistance Movement, and it also means zeal. It's an Islamist party, which was a spin-off of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they preferred a return to a violent struggle to eliminate Israel. In 2006, in an election for the Palestinian Authority, they win the most seats, defeating Fatah for the first time, which lost because of perception by the Palestinian community as them being kind of entrenched bureaucratic corrupt interest. And there's a lot of waffling by Western powers. They're like, oh, we want democracy within Palestine for Palestinians. And when they see this result, they're like, so Hamas rises up and takes power violently within Gaza. This was shortly after Israel unilaterally disengaged from Gaza. Because there were settlements in Gaza, the Gaza Strip, but in 2005, considering the security risk that the Israeli state felt the Jewish were facing in Gaza, they unilaterally pulled out. Because of the result of Hamas taking power in Gaza, Israel sets up a blockade of sea and air, so Gaza becomes the largest open-air prison in the world. And the Palestinian Authority has not held elections since then, and the remaining territory in the West Bank has been steadily eroded by illegal Israeli settlements. And this is the map that I was referring to earlier with the Oslo Accords. So you see on the West Bank how there are some areas that are in full control. The deep blue, that's the full control. So the Oslo Accords divided the areas of the West Bank into 3 different zones, areas A, B, and C. The Palestinian Authority would have full control. Areas B there would be joint control, and Area C would be full Israeli control of the security forces. So the deep blue is that Area A, where the Palestinian Authority has full control. The lighter blue is where the security apparatus is shared, and then the rest is controlled by the Israeli military, the IDF. Um, so where the West Bank is still under the control of Fatah, um, and they are still committed to trying to negotiate a two-state solution through peaceful diplomatic terms, but um, their power is slowly being eroded by these illegal settlements. And then this is a full-on transition of the territory over time. And a little timeline on the bottom as well, which I'm pretty sure I was able to get through all of it. Yeah, and that is the conclusion of the presentation. If you want